One of the most important clues you find in this room is the newspaper, which both talks about the era, which is, of course, the 1930s, the Depression, and we also learn about the place that we're in Louisiana, with talk of John's Eve and the voodoo and the cults. We sort of set up that whole notion of that this is something that will come later. But we also present Cassandra Beauregard, which is our narrator and one of the guests here at Derceto.
To help guide the player to see which key fits a lock, we try to incorporate some common design denominators on both the lock and the key, and hopefully it makes it easier for the player to see, and at the same time keep it very grounded in the era. A lot of the colors you will see in the game is inspired by the original game, and that's why we have this earthly and a lot of green colors. It's an homage to the original.
Yael Barrows, the original artist of the game, who did choose the color palettes, likes a lot the color of the games now, because she used to say that she draws with old colors, and the games is full of old colors.
As we begin Chapter 2, we allow the player to move a little bit more freely around Derceto and discover more of it. Of course, they start off mostly locked off, but you're able to unlock most of it and get a better sense of what the house is. But of course, we're also keeping some of it a secret for Chapter 4.
The original game was a kind of an early open world. Once you discover a new room or a new floor, you can go back to it. It was not used a lot in the game, but you can. I like games where you need to read books because it sets a different pace. It's not an action game, and the player can be more immersed in the story. There are two reasons for the book in the original game. The first one was to add another layer of horror, to try to put more scary things in the head, in the mind of the player. The other reason is to give clue, to give information to the player to be able to solve the puzzles. One of the big challenges of the game was how to scare the player. What I did find at this time is that I needed to scare the player with what he is doing most of the time. I mean, moving, opening doors. So that's why there is this trapdoor in the first corridor that you cannot avoid. It was just to put a pressure. It just happened once in the game, but I was sure that since this moment, the player was just scared to move in the game. Same thing for opening a door. The second door in the game, you can find a monster behind it. There is even a book that you can die from just reading it, which is something you need to do often in the game. So the pressure was constant on the player.
When we talked about how we should fill up the second floor foyer, we discussed ideas such as a billiard table or some other kind of leisure props, but we went for adding these nightmarish statues you can see here, which is made or sculpted by Jeremy, and they are heavily inspired by Giacometti Alberto Giacometti.
If you play the original game as Emily Hartwood, the opening text will say, "That creaking old mansion with its unusual tales, its secret library door, the ancient upstairs clock." So the ancient upstairs clock became this puzzle item. And this is pretty much how a lot of the important things in our game came to be. Basically looking at something that was mentioned or featured in the original game and then blew it out of proportion and made something new with it.
And actually, in the original game, there was a clock that you need to push to discover an item, like in the first Resident Evil, by the way.
This must be the clock mentioned in the commonplace book.
So here we have the first puzzle disc, which is made in Japanese style called kintsugi, which means golden repair, which we thought was pretty picturing for what we wanted to tell with the plate. The golden relief or the repair creates the star sign Taurus, which is something Mike will talk more about in the lore. But it's a very important part of the game.
Emily's here.
You will find a lot of masks throughout the whole game. You can find them in Jeremy's room, and of course Grace is making one for Ruth. And this is an important item or ID, the ID that everyone is wearing masks in some way, especially the people at Derceto. They all have secrets and they don't want to share everything. So they put on masks, hide their true selves. And of course, it's a very clear metaphor. But for all the Lovecraftian nerds out there, it's of course also a very, very clear clue that we're dealing with Nyarlathotep, which in our game is sort of, he uses the Dark Man or the Black Pharaoh, that type of avatar. And that's how he carries on the dialogue with Jeremy and how he also, of course, mentally tortures him.
For Baptiste's room, we went with a really rough patina, and because he is a big guy, he's very practical and stoic, and he also likes to box a lot, and he has his leisure things. He reads his magazines, listens to his radio, and smoking cigars, and so we try to get that going in his room. In contrast to Baptiste's room, which is very simple and rough, we have Peros's room, the opera singer, and she is very vain, and she is focusing much on her beauty. And we have the centerpiece of the bed with the bed canopy, and we try to get as much as possible of the music into her set dressing. And of course, some of the furnitures are Italian inspired. And her colors would be terracotta and cream and earthly. For the oil rig level, we put all houses on stilts. Because in the real world, the houses would be standing on stilts because of all the water and the flooding. The mound is an expanded ID from the vertical slice and early proof of concept of the game, which made it into the final game as well. At the beginning, it was the lair of a witch the player needed to defeat, and we were inspired visually from the season 1 of True Detective, and of course, bird nests.
The Barlow Land.
The significance of the constellation of Taurus may seem a bit opaque, but in my mind it all comes down to another symbol for the good and evil within Jeremy, and in turn all of us. There are two things we find in that constellation that is of interest to us. First, the star Aldebaran. We often just call it the Dark Sun, which is a representation of Nyarlathotep and the presence of the Dark Man. In the same constellation we also find the Pleiades, which is said to house the great library of Celano, which in our game is called Taruea. So, all in all, in this cosmic bull we find darkness in the Aldebaran and the light in Celano. Or in the terms of our game, in this celestial creature we find the Dark Man as well as Juan, the ultimate enemy and the ultimate ally, as manifested by Jeremy. Finally, of course, what is a star constellation, if not an effort to establish order out of the chaos that is nature? Which is why the final puzzle of the game is rebuilding the constellation of Taurus.
The original game was set in 1920 because this is a very convenient time. Everything looks familiar, houses, furnitures, but there is no technology which can mess up a lot of things in the gameplay. So this was very convenient. There is a big difference from the original game in this one. You can meet a lot of different characters. In the original one, I decided since the beginning that, because it was easier to do, that you will not meet any other character.
And as you all know by now, we didn't follow that suggestion. No, we chose to incorporate quite a lot of characters just because we thought it would be fun. I guess we're a little less alone in the dark, but we were fine with it. In the Grand Parlor, you can find a piano that has crashed through the ceiling. And this is a reference to the original game. The first quest, basically, that you get as a player is that you're told there's a piano in the attic, and you should go and investigate it. And so early on in our game as well, the idea would be that you get this very same quest. But as you have to pass the Grand Parlor, we thought it would be fun to find the piano having sort of crashed through the ceiling and made a whole mess, because kind of saying this is sort of what the original, this game is sort of like the original, but not quite.
It was very fun to see the piano that went down from the attic to the ground. Yep, in the first game, the piano was here more to find a reason for the player to go upstairs more than anything else.
So this is
Certain areas in the Dersero is designed to look very distinctly different in themes, designs and color palettes. And we referenced David Lynch and Wes Anderson pretty much to get some kind of absurdly quirky and eccentric colors and it's mostly about the unified color scheme, I would say.
And as a player, I really like the fact that you need to understand and solve the puzzle, understand the story, because in nowadays game, it's more and more rare to let the player trying to solve the mystery by himself and not be taken by hand by the game.
It worked. I'm in another one of Jeremy's dreams.
The cemetery level is inspired by Lafayette Cemetery and the St. Louis number 3 cemetery in New Orleans. Unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to visit them in person due to the pandemic. But I think we got a real good representation of them in the game. And we also added some spice to emphasize the overall theme of nature taking over.
Oh, I like this place. It reminds me a lot the old movies from the 70s and 80s, which are one of the big inspiration for the original game, especially Amityville Horror and Dawn of the Dead.
Cemetery has a lot of narrow maze-like passages mixed with more open spaces, such as the small plazas. This is to add contrast and also keep an organic theme going without it being or feeling forced.